EU leaders have agreed to block more Russian oil imports by the end of this year.
The European Union is still united in its purpose. The purpose is to stop Russia's aggressive war in Ukraine.
But that ban will only apply to oil that arrives by sea. Pipeline oil isn't affected by the deal. Neither are natural gas imports. Igor Zhovkva is deputy head of the Office of the President of Ukraine. He's President Zelensky's top diplomatic advisor, and he's in Madrid. Hi, Mr. Zhovkva. Very good to meet you and good to have you on our program.
Thank you for having me.
I want to start off with the partial oil embargo announced overnight by the EU, and more specifically the way in which European countries are characterizing it as very significant, very decisive action. How would you characterize it?
Well, it's really significant and it's really decisive, but it's far from being enough what we asked from the European Union, because we asked for the full embargo for oil, and now they only have some seaborne embargo for oil. And the rest of which is coming under the pipeline is unfortunately not falling under embargo. But this is definitely better than nothing. But definitely this should not be the last point and the last stop, be it the embargo on oil or further be it embargo on gas, or be it embargo on other commodities, which are traded with Russia. Because every euro, every dollar Russia earns from trading its oil, gas, and other commodities is immediately spent to military industry of Russia, producing more ballistic missiles, more fighter jets, more tanks, more artilleries to kill more and more Ukrainians.
There was a lot of negotiation between countries to even within the EU to even arrive at the decision they did yesterday. What level of faith do you have, if at all, that they will go beyond what they've announced at some point?
Well, this is a unity which European Union has to preserve. And this is the unity they are talking about when talking about Ukraine, for instance. When talking about granting Ukraine and Canada status in the EU, they say about unity. So this time unity was even harder to achieve. And yes, you're right, you are. Further sanctions might involve even more quarrels and blackmailing and, bargaining from some members of the EU. So that's why probably the EU has to rethink its decision-making policy. Maybe it's high time to have the reform of the decision-making process in the EU, because definitely everyone should understand that there are some countries, or even one country, who are really interested in the EU being not so unified vis-a-vis Ukraine, vis-a-vis sanctions, vis-a-vis fighting the aggressor. And that's what should be taken into consideration.
European countries also sort of talk about taking into consideration the level of dependence they have on Russia. And obviously, in hindsight, that level of dependence should be reconsidered at the very least. But are you sympathetic at all to the idea that if they were to just cut things off altogether at once, there would be a dramatic impact in their countries?
Look, yes, there are some countries which are dependent on Russian energy resources, but those countries are already trying to make their best to have the alternative sources more and more. The energy resources are not only Russia. It's many European countries. They can take it from the US and other countries of the world. So each and every country who is responsible, they are now trying to enlarge their system of pipelines, connecting them with other European countries. They're trying to enlarge the system of LNG terminals, or the systems which would allow them to have the tanker oil. And there are some countries or country which never is going to do this. So that's why it's up to the responsibility of each and every country in these difficult circumstances to be responsible and to be thinking not only about its egoistic interests, but to be thinking about the security in Europe.
I want to ask about another security issue, and that's around food security. And in particular, the grain that is being blocked in Ukraine right now by Russia along the sea at the different ports. I read a tweet, I think it was, from your country's foreign minister, who said there might be, or there are rather, discussions going on right now about the possibility of a UN-led operation to open up a port or multiple ports or get that grain flowing. Can you tell us anything about that?
Well, absolutely right. Ukraine is ready to offer its more than 20 million tons of grain ready to be exported to the countries of the European Union and further to the Middle East countries, Asian countries, African countries. We are ready to offer what we can offer. We are ready to offer our grain. We are ready to offer our ports unblocked. We are ready to offer our vessels or allow the vessels of any other third countries to come into our ports and to take our grain. But right you are, Ukraine will not cope alone. And Ukraine should not cope alone in these hard circumstances because Ukraine is waging a warfare. And at the same time, Ukraine is thinking about overcoming the potential food security crisis. That's why, yes, my president is talking to the president of the European Council. My president was talking to the UN Secretary General. There are interactions between these international institutions, but definitely Ukraine will do all its best to help the world to prevent the food crisis.
Russia has not shown any willingness, at least, and correct me if I'm wrong, to move away from blocking that grain. I imagine there would have to be some willingness on Russia's part if the grain gets flowing again. Have you seen anything to the contrary? Like, do you think Russia, for example, would allow for a UN operation to get that grain flowing again?
Well, I don't know. You better ask Russian officials, or just one person who is unwilling to block any Ukrainian ports or just one port or just to provide one route, a secure route to have this export. Probably because Russia is competing with Ukraine on the grain market, stealing Ukrainian grain now from the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine, because we see that some Russian vessels taking Ukrainian crops are going to the direction of Russian ports. And then from their ports, they export this Ukrainian grain to the other countries. So that is why let all the international community talk to Russia and persuade Russia that Russia should not be only responsible for the food crisis. When Russia claims that this is because of sanctions, that's false. The food crisis arises not because of sanctions against Russia, but only and solely because of unwillingness of Russia to let the Ukrainian exports go further to the world.
Just one final question, Mr. Zhovkva, before I let you go, and that's around, in particular, Canadian lethal aid to Ukraine. I know that howitzers and ammunition are the most recent announcements. Is there an ask from Ukraine for additional lethal aid from Canada?
We are satisfied with the level of lethal aid which is provided by Canada as well as by other partners, US and some other countries. But if you ask me whether it is enough, it is not. Because, we're waging a very difficult battle over Donbass now, as well as we are waging a counteroffensive in the Kharkiv region, or we have to deoccupy the south of Ukraine. And in order to have this all, we need weapon. Heavy weaponry, artillery systems, multi-rocket launch system, anti-ship missiles, armored vehicles and tanks. So every country which has those types of equipment, types of weapon, should be provided to Ukraine as soon as possible, because that's how we will near the victory of Ukraine over Russian aggressor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zhovkva. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.